Welcome to Slight Reliability, the show where we learn SRE and observability 1 week at a time. I'm Stephen Townsend.
Welcome back to Slight Reliability. I'm Stephen Townsend, and this is the show where we learn about SRE and observability 1 week at a time. Today, I am joined by Brian Singer, who is the co-founder and chief product officer at Nobl9. Before that, he was a product manager at Google, which is where he got his first exposure to SRE. So welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you, Stephen. Really excited to be on today.
A quick question. What is Nobl9 about? What do you do?
So we provide a platform that enables the management of service level objectives at scale. We like to think of ourselves as providers of a reliability platform. And so our customers basically, usually larger enterprises that are trying to get a handle on reliability, understand the impact of downtime sort of across user journeys, that sort of thing. And yeah, we've been at it for 4 years now. It's been a good ride. And we were actually just yesterday, we announced that we're now a Gartner Cool vendor for what it's worth. So
that's yeah. Cool. It reminds me of, so I talked to Dr. Vlad Yukis, his episode, you haven't heard it yet because it hasn't been released, but he talks about the need to build an SRE infrastructure. And that's all about, essentially, it sounds like Nobl9 is basically providing the SRE infrastructure that you need. You don't have to build it yourself necessarily, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I think what we provide is a critical part of that infrastructure. Most of the companies that are customers of ours have pretty complex environments. It's not uncommon to see user journeys that are crossing 200, 300, 400 services, multiple teams, hundreds of people. And so coordinating reliability across, that sort of a complexity is a real challenge. And that's really where we have a lot of impact.
Not surprisingly, today we're talking about SLOs, which is something that I've talked about in the past and I've struggled to implement them in my own work in the past. And what we thought we'd do today is talk a little bit about some of my experiences that I've had, and then we could talk about maybe how I could have done them better or other angles that I could look at.
Yeah, my guess is your experiences are not unlike many other companies as well. So it's, I think, a great topic.
The first sort of conundrum that we faced at IAG when we were looking to implement SLOs for the first time was, where do we start? Like, was the chicken or the egg? Do you start with the SLIs or SLOs? And something we vacillated between. We were trying to build this model about these workshops that we would run to sort of go through the process of discussing what's important, figuring it out and everything. I still don't know exactly what I would do. I think in some contexts it makes sense to say, let's figure out the key indicators which tell us about the reliability of the service and just start measuring them. And then from there, you could define your SLOs based on what reliability currently looks like and where you want to take it. Or you could start from a really high level and say, this is, in this business context, this thing needs to be this reliable.
Yeah.
And then work your way down. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's really hard to boil the ocean. that top down is very difficult. I think you're thinking about it correctly in terms of sort of taking it in stages. The reality is it does take an investment of time. And it's very hard to have people put that investment in unless they understand what's in it for them, what's the benefit for them. So when you talk about bootstrapping an SLO program, I think you're on the right track when you say you have to provide some of the basics. However, and this is sort of, I think you hit this sort of trough of disillusionment. If, I've seen the other side of the coin where if you only do the basics and you automate all the basics, then you haven't actually provided anything of actual value. And that's where sort of, I would say, SLO programs go to die. So it's actually a balance. And where we've seen it be really successful, like there is a level of automation and a level of bootstrapping, but then there's also some amount of coordination to sort of evolve the maturity over time. Something that I've seen be really effective is just have an understanding that not all SLOs are of the same quality, right? It's the first SLO that you build, maybe you just use an SLI and you automate the creation of an objective based on data that you have. That's like here, at the bottom rung. And then what you're talking about of, hey, we fully understand end to end what the user expectation is. We have the right signals to measure that. We have the right objectives for that. That's sort of nirvana. It's very hard to start there on day one.
Which is what we tried to do, yeah.
Which is what you try, is what you can try to do. I think talking about that as sort of the end state is helpful, though, because it helps people understand, okay, what's the end goal. We're not going to be there today, right? But and this is the first step we're going to take on that path. The other thing I would say is that I think it is a little dependent on the culture of the organization. Is it more of a tops down type organization where people don't do things until their manager tells them to do it? Then it does need the rollout of a program like this does need to be a little bit more top down. If it's more of a bottoms up type of culture, then it does need to sort of start from a single product manager or a single engineering team saying, okay, I'm going to do this because I understand the value for me in my daily life.
You're the third or fourth guest in very recent history to talk about that idea that in some situations you need to get leadership or executive buy-in quite early on. Like you don't have to do massive amounts of wide work straight away, but you got to get buy-in from top down, and then you try something and prove it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
sales side of SRE, as Stanley calls it. Yeah.
There has to be a value prop for everybody in the organization to do something like this. And when you talk about executives, the biggest issue that we've seen is the granularity of the data when you start to build SLOs is pretty meaningless. Like once you get up 2 or 3 levels above the people that are actually carrying pagers, or really understand the product. And I'm guilty of this too with our own product, right? I don't understand every service that we've built and how it's supposed to work, but I understand it sort of at the level of user journeys or what customers might care about. So the key is being able to sort of bubble up that information to a granularity that makes sense to an executive audience, right? And that's usually, okay, what is the team, how is the team that's responsible for this set of services doing? How is the user journey doing? That I understand it at the level of a user journey. I don't need to see everything sort of under the waterline there, but at least I can understand, because then you can start to use it to make decisions about velocity and where to invest resources and so on. I think it's a lot easier to say, all right, we're going to invest in improving our platform this year if I see that the reliability of the product is going down because the platform isn't providing the level of service that it needs to. So it's sort of just getting to the right level of granularity for the audience, helping them understand it. I mean, as crass as it might seem, and I know that we in SRE operate in a blameless culture, but in some respects, it's all right. Give me the top 5 directors that are having issues, right? And that's maybe at the VP level. That's what I want to see. I want to see who's doing well, who's not doing well, and that's the level I can use to make a decision.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, once again, I think it depends on culture, right? There's this certain culture where people would be too afraid and they would do anything they can to fudge the numbers and just because they don't want to have the spotlight on them because it just means bad things. But there's other cultures where they're like, great, we've got a chance to improve. Let's sort this out.
Yeah. I think the hey, we should fudge the numbers, like that stuff comes to light pretty quickly when you start to build a robust program. One of the things that I think we've realized helping sort of dozens of companies roll out SLOs now is that it is in addition to the technical work of building the SLOs, it is a fair amount of project management to do it. And that's not necessarily something that is something that I think we can make easier with product, but it does take people and it does take the human touch to be able to reach out and say, okay, this is where we are and this is where we need to go, and keep track of the state across an organization and so on.
You've talked about already SLOs and the meaning that they have, and if you just do out of the box automated SLOs that have no meaning, that's one way SLOs can die. And I definitely was on the other end of the spectrum. I was trying to find SLOs with just so much meaning. They were so tied to the business objectives and and really struggling with that. So my first example ever with SLOs was a Kubernetes platform team, and they said we want to do SLOs, and we were like, great, let's work on this together. And we ran these workshops, and I talked about this at SLOconf. We picked we figured out all their key customers, all their key services. We prioritized. Then we figured out, okay, now let's, and then that's where we got to the SLO, SLI, which comes first, the kind of discussion. And after literally 3 months of work, we got to the end and we had some SLOs and some things about availability and latency. And it just felt like, so what? It just doesn't feel connected still. So I guess my question is, how do you find, because part of it is the conversations you have as well with, say, product owners, executives, anyone who's maybe not so technical, and to say, how do you translate from, 99.9% availability to something they understand and actually has meaning? Like,
right. How do you take it to the next level? Well, I think first of all, it's like, where are you using this data, right? So the companies that are getting the most value are, it's a part of their operational reviews, right? They're reviewing the status of operations once a month. What I've seen, what I've observed is a lot of the time, the input to those reviews before SLOs is, let's count the number of P0 and P1 outages that we had that were opened as tickets in, choose your ticketing, management tool of choice that were opened as tickets, and let's count the amount of time that those were open for. But you can understand, like, that's not actually telling you a whole lot about the reliability of a complex set of software. It's telling you something. And I mean, you can spend a lot of time on, why MTTR is a terrible metric for understanding reliability or whatever. But, it's telling you something, but not what you're actually trying to learn. So just by replacing that set of metrics with SLOs in operational reviews, so that's a lot of value. So it's got to be part of the workflow, right? If you're not having a monthly stand-up to talk about operations and what went well and what didn't well, I would definitely encourage, that to be something that you get on a cadence with leadership about, because otherwise, like, if the pager's going off every night, like, who are you telling about it? That just sounds like a recipe for burnout and a terrible lifestyle as an SRE or developer carrying a pager. And then the next place is to sort of start getting value, and this takes a little more time, but is actually using it for alerting, actually using SLOs for alerting, and moving to error budget based, burn rate based alerting for more of the things. And the nice thing about burn rate based alerting is that you can tune it so that not everything goes to the pager, but you're catching and you're starting to catch things earlier. And that's sort of what I've seen as like the aha moment, right? When things that are wrong in the infrastructure, or something that a deployment broke, is caught before it becomes an incident, and it's worked on as part of normal development work in a normal development lifecycle that it's planned for. That's I think one of the real powers of SLOs, is that it helps sort of filter out the signal from the noise. Okay, this is a problem. This is something we need to work on. We have about a month before anybody notices, but we know that we need to do this work. And in my experience, that helps the velocity and the mental health of the engineering team as a whole. But focusing on velocity for a second, if you have a lot of interrupts in the work that you're doing, it really cuts down on productivity for an engineer. So just being able to schedule tech debt and prioritize tech debt, I think based off of sort of burn rate based alerts is one of the biggest values. But it takes some time to get there, right? You're not going to get there with the first SLO that you build on day one. We're going to turn on alerting, and people are going to say, "Well, what's this?" So I think your intuition is right that it has to be deployed for some amount of time, and that's where the project management aspect comes in. Having a plan to say the first 6 months we're just going to use to tune to start understand the data to make these better, and then we're going to turn on burn rate based alerting for this critical set of services, but we're not going to turn off our own old alerting, and then we're going to try to start turning down some of our noisy alerts that haven't necessarily correlated well to actual customer impact.
Yeah, that's one of the aspects of SLOs that I do really like, conceptually anyway, is that traditional monitoring has so many alerts coming through from all these things, and they may have nothing to do with the fact that your customers are impacted or not. But once you get to the point of defining SLOs, you're getting actual signals, the things that actually really matter. There's a problem there, and I think
yes. It really helps though to have a mandate for reliability, to have a team that, and from sort of looking at personas within a company, I see actually two personas in SRE, and I think you understand this, but there is that persona, the person that's responsible for reliability, and it's funny because typically they have all of the accountability and none of the power. They're probably not actually the people carrying the pager for a lot of the services that drive reliability for an application, but they still have the accountability for it. And then you have SREs that are responsible for the actual that are actually carrying the pager for or their application developers, whatever the model is, right? I delineated into folks that are carrying the pager versus folks that are responsible for the infrastructure, the platform, the observability, the overall production readiness. I think that's a term that we hear quite a bit. And I've seen it be most successful where there is an organization with, or at least a set of people with a clear mandate to to be responsible for reliability. And I think it maps out to where we were with security maybe 15, 20 years ago, dating myself in the industry. But, early on, security was just kind of like an afterthought and something that we left to developers, and just a little bit of overhead. And as it's become more important and evolved, and compliance has become more important, and people start to lose like real money off of security, now there's centralized security orgs that are building the security program that are and I think reliability is starting to get treated in much the same way.
I remember I started my career in performance testing, and I would come along. Usually they'd invite me, this a 9-month or multi-year program of work. They'd bring me in for the last 2 weeks to test the performance of the thing. And the security guy from some other company would show up as well. And we'd be...
Yeah. All right, is it secure? Did we build it right? Yeah. But the reality is, and I think you understand, like those practices have to be baked into the actual development process. And SLOs are one of those things that, I think part of why it's hard is you're trying to go in and retrofit this into something that already exists. Whereas if you just did it from day one, it would be quite a bit easier.
Okay, on to another topic. I think my experience anyway for SLOs is that I found it very difficult to set them within certain architectures and team structures. In particular, I talk about, let's say you've got a customer, they click a button, and conservatively, there's 10 different components that this request chain flows through, and maybe 10 different teams own those 10 different components. And you get to the point where you're like, well, where do we set the SLO? Do we set it for every single team? And does that mean that 10 times more SLOs is a lot more work, or do we just set it end to end? And then, so I've been in the situation. And what happens if you're the team somewhere in the middle and you're like, okay, let's start availability to start with that. We want to be 99% available. But then you have to think about, well, how available are our dependencies? And you have to start measuring that, or get information from them, and then figure that out. And it's all based on what they can provide, and then what you can provide. Yeah. And then it just, when there's chains of 10 different teams from 10 different divisions, maybe it gets really complicated. So I guess, how do you do SLOs? And what are some ways you might help you implement SLOs in that kind of architecture, team structure?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a pattern that I've seen repeat itself over and over and over again. It's just the complexity. I think you have to start down at that team level of what am I providing today, right? Forget what I want to provide or what we think needs to happen. What am I providing today? And maybe look at a month of data when you know that you didn't have any outages, for example. That gives you a pretty good baseline. I'll toot our own horn for a minute. We have a capability in our product called SLI Analyzer, where you can bring that data in, the historical data, and understand like how much error budget you would have burned given different objectives. So that's step one. But then to answer the question of, well, what do you do when you have a user journey that's across all of these different SLOs? That's more of a reporting challenge and a hierarchy challenge. And we did some things in our product to make that a little bit easier to manage. One of the things that we recognized really early on is that the way that you want to actually build SLIs and calculate SLOs is often a little bit divorced from the way that the organization is structured and how you want to report on it to get the most value. So when we built our reporting, we built it to allow you to basically create a structure for sort of what the organization looks like. Maybe it's like there's a VP and there's a director, and then there's a critical business services with it, under that director, right? And then maybe there's underlying services, and then map the SLOs that matter to those critical business services into that structure. So that's just an area where it's still evolving. Like I don't sit here and pretend that I have all the answers, but it is certainly I think something that we do a better job of today than we did of maybe 2 years ago when all we were doing was allowing you to provide the definition for a single SLO. But yeah, I mean, starting from the sort of granular atomic team level and then building up. The other thing I'll say is the quality of the SLIs that you have starts to matter. Certainly, if you have tracing capabilities, and most of the modern APM tools can do tracing, you can start to trace a request through multiple systems and build an SLO off of that tracing data. So we've seen that, although you'd be shocked at the number of organizations which is very small, that have the sophistication to actually build SLOs off of tracing data, or even using tracing data today. Yeah. Most SLOs are being built off of log data, which is, I think, if I look at the most interesting SLOs, they're actually things that are coming off of stuff that's being logged to traditional logging vendors. So you have both the side of like, okay, I'm going to measure availability and latency at the load balancer for these services and build SLOs off of that. And then maybe I have, a way to log, did this transaction complete successfully and how long did it take? And I'm going to use both of those to create two distinct SLOs, and I'm going to measure it from sort of both directions.
Within that atomic team level of defining SLOs, let's say you have a team, you are like maybe an API layer, and your service calls downstream things to actually do the processing before you pass back. Would you always say, okay, the reliability that we provide also includes this downstream components? Or would you ever say, let's stub them out? Cut them out and just focus on the reliability of our component in isolation? And I think I know the answer to this question, but what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it depends what you're measuring, but I think it's implicit, right? If you have an SLI that, in measuring that SLI, there are other dependencies in that chain, then you're implicitly measuring the reliability of those other services. I would suggest that you probably want to have 2 or 3 SLOs, right? That, maybe one which looks at just how your service is performing, if you can tease out those dependencies, and then one that looks at, okay, this is my contract to my upstream customer. Yes, I have dependencies, but can I meet my contract to my upstream customer? And if I can't, maybe I have to start looking at those dependencies. And I think that's where you start to get a really good conversation. And this is where I've seen it work really well. You start to get a very good conversation going on of, okay, our dependencies aren't providing the level of service that we need for what we know that we have to deliver. Well, maybe we need to look at different dependencies. You can say at Nobl9, we used SLOs to make exactly that decision. We moved off one of our platform providers to another one because we didn't feel like we could achieve the level of reliability that we needed for our customers. And so I think you want to be able to have that conversation about, the dependencies. Maybe it's, hey, we need this team to go re-architect to meet our needs. And then it's, okay, maybe we need to give them some resourcing to do that. Is that worth it to the company? Well, if it's not, then we have to lower the expectations that our customers have.
I've got two more questions
Sure.
that I want to cover. The first one is, within an organization, how do you sell SLOs? And there are certain organizations which should be like great, and some will be much more difficult. So recently I talked to a guy called Praveen Kasam. He's an SRE practitioner, and he talked about needing to sort of find that hook, that selling point for each stakeholder group. So for executives, it might be about, this is going to help you, deliver these big, initiatives you want to do. But for the engineers on the ground floor, this is going to make your life easier because you're going to get interrupted less. You're going to get to write more code because you're not dealing with all this stuff. So what's the selling point for SLOs? Like, any advice on early on getting buy-in?
If it's really early on, it's helpful to find one or two teams that are sort of at the forefront of the organization, that are maybe replatforming onto cloud, or building a new version of the product that nobody's ever seen before. And generally, the people working on those are a little bit maybe more willing to try new things, and we've seen that be really effective. Then they put it in place and they say, hey, look at what we do. And then everybody else kind of gloms onto that. If it is a more hierarchical organization, then getting leadership buy-in from day one is critical, because otherwise you're just not going to get the resourcing to make something like this successful. Have them talk to their peers who are successful. Believe it or not, companies that sell SLOs or sell platforms to enable SLOs have a stable of executives that have been successful, that are more than willing to speak with their peers. So I think some of that peer-to-peer feedback can really help on the leadership level. And then it's I think important not to force it on anybody, but there comes a point when that sort of the carrot and the stick can be effective. So the carrot is, hey, if you have an SLO on your service that SRE has signed off on, you don't need to go through this step of production readiness review. We sign off on it, right? We can just look at the SLO. So that's been really effective as the carrot of just like, hey, this reduces your overhead. And then the stick is, and I've seen the stick is, hey, we're a bank. This is now a control in the system. You have to have an SLO. It has to be checked in, and you have to get with the program. And I'm not a fan of like the stick, but
neither.
It does work. I have seen it work, but it's in more of those heavily regulated environments. So we're changing our definition of production readiness. All critical services have to have this defined. It has to be reviewed once a quarter. You do the same thing for security. And if you think about availability and reliability, the importance to the business is really no different than security. I know businesses that understand that if they were down for 48 hours, their business wouldn't exist anymore. It's something that does have to be taken seriously. And, we got to use all the tools at our disposal.
Recently, I think that conversation between velocity and reliability is probably quite a good one as well to have with leadership, to say, look, there's a certain point. I know you want to go fast. You want to deliver these things. But at a certain point, the reliability, if it's not good enough, is going to slow you down anyway. So there has to be a certain level of investment in reliability.
Yes. Yeah. I think the challenge with that is because it's not like a hard ROI. You can't say like, if I could say to an executive, if you invest in SLOs, your team is going to produce 30% more code next year. Like, I would love to say that. I think I believe it's true, but nobody's done a study to help me back that up. But if that's something somebody wants to take on, I'm all for it.
Okay, last question. I, in the past, have thought about SLOs, and I actually did a talk on the Pure Performance podcast about what I thought were prerequisites before you can get SLO success. Maybe not prerequisites, maybe this is a strong word, but I'm sure there are things which make it easier to implement, to sort of pave the way. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I think one thing is what I mentioned earlier, which is having a team. Maybe it's an individual, maybe it's a team, depending on the size that is focused on sort of reliability architecture and reliable operations as a matrix into the rest of the organization. If you don't have that, then you're really looking at, real grounds up, team by team, but especially in a larger organization, it's really hard to get the level of coordination to get it right. And then you'll have apples and oranges. One team does SLOs this way, one team does it that way. Nobody really knows what's going on. You have 6 different people building SLOs in 6 different places. There's no coordination. And then at some point, somebody stands up and says, this is a big waste of all of our time. So I would say that's one prerequisite, is just having enough leadership buy-in and I think the good news is what we've seen in most of the larger organizations, that they've sort of crossed that chasm, so to speak. A lot of places have made that investment in saying, okay, we need a team that's focused on production readiness. That's, maybe it's an outshoot of the sort of dev tools teams that were out there, so to speak. But there is like a real focus on operations as a distinct unit. I think it's kind of like the pendulum swinging. We went way toward the DevOps side of like, let's just let developers buy any tool they want. And I think the pendulum is swinging back a little bit to saying, well, there has to be some amount of centralization. Like, it doesn't make sense to just have it be the wild, wild west out there. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
The other prerequisite, I think, is to have enough capacity in your observability systems to be able to do SLOs. Now, I've seen a lot of, I'll just say, logging vendor to remain nameless, where the actual plant is so overburdened and it's so expensive to get licenses and it's so expensive to add capacity that like you'll never be able to use that data for SLOs because just the query load alone would destroy it. There's such better architectures out there now. There's great tools for improving on that, for building obviously like open source observability pipelines. I'm not saying that you need to have open telemetry and a full great observability stack and observability 2.0 to get started. I think that's a fallacy. Like, if you try to do that and then do SLOs, you'll never have SLOs. But at the very least, look at what you have now and say, do we have the capacity to bring this in? And if not, are there some things that we can do to make the situation a little bit better in the short term, whether that's bringing another vendor in or looking at some sort of consolidation.
Thank you so much, Brian. This has been an awesome conversation. Is there anything else you wanted to cover today?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed it, Stephen. I would say if folks are interested in learning more about our product, Nobl9, you can get started with a free trial. You don't even have to talk to a salesperson. But if you do want to talk to us, we're happy to help you out and share some of what we've learned out there with you.
So thank you so much, Brian, once again. And everyone else, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time.